The barn owl. Portrayed as a messenger of evil by ancient Egyptian, European, and Native American artists. Today, this white owl is a symbol of conservation. We've even given it affectionate nicknames such as monkey-faced owl and heart-faced owl. It's proven its worth around farms as an expert exterminator of mice and rats, so much so that several large cities have tried releasing barn owls to hunt these pests along streets and in alleys. But given a choice, barn owls prefer the pastures, fields, and croplands found away from urban areas. Barn owls are the most widespread of all owls. They can be found on every continent except Antarctica and occur in almost every region of the earth that supports vegetation. This includes most of North and South America, Africa, Australia, Western Europe, and India. In North America, they are widespread throughout the U.S. and Mexico, with isolated populations occurring in southwestern Canada. Barn owls are nearly always found in open habitat. They occasionally nest or take shelter in wooded areas, but they are not adapted to hunt there. Open areas such as this mixture of fallow fields, pastures, and cropland support a large population of small rodents and may hold 4 to 6 families of barn owls in a square mile. But to raise a nest of young, the barn owls need more than just food. They also need a nest cavity. Historically, these owls used cavities in large hardwood trees for nesting. But today, the large hardwood trees are rare. So instead of trees, many modern barn owls nest in old sheds, fire towers, steeples, barns, and silos. They choose silos for several reasons. First, they are constructed like a large hollow tree with plenty of room for a large nest of young. Second, predators such as raccoons and snakes that might destroy a nest of eggs find silos difficult to climb into. And third, silos are usually found in the croplands and pastures where barn owls hunt. A sign that a barn owl may be nesting in a silo or any other structure is a buildup of whitewash or uric acid. This is a pasty white nitrogen solution that is passed from birds, much like urine is passed from mammals. A good sign that a barn owl is nesting in a structure is the presence of pellets. These masses of bone and hair are spit out by an owl after it's digested the fleshy portions of its prey. In some areas, barn owls nest throughout the year, but most nest in early spring when new vegetation begins to grow. This sudden growth of vegetation at the end of winter supports a burst in small mammal populations. This abundance of mice and rats, in turn, supports the new barn owl families. Many barn owls choose one mate for life, though some males have been known to support 2 females in 2 different nests at the same time. Courtship begins 1 or 2 months before nesting. The 2 barn owls seen here are a breeding pair. The male is the lighter-colored bird of the 2 sexes and is seen here on the left. The darker bird on the right is a female. Within a few days, this pair will choose a spot to nest, and the female will begin egg-laying. 1 egg is laid every 2 days until the clutch is complete, usually 4 to 7 eggs, but sometimes as few as 1 or as many as 13. Even though this nest is inside a silo, the female has burrowed out a small cavity in the old silage for her nest spot. The female begins incubation with the first egg. Since the eggs are laid 2 days apart, the owlets also hatch at 2-day intervals. The largest owlet here is 4 days old, the other is 2 days old, and the remaining eggs will continue this pattern. Since newly hatched barn owls are naked, blind, and helpless, they depend entirely upon their mother to care for them. The mother, in turn, depends upon her mate to deliver food to the nest. Even though these owlets are fed by their mother, the 2-day spacing gives the first to hatch an advantage over the others. The second to hatch has the same advantage over the remaining owlets, and so on down the line. The oldest will be more aggressive and therefore get fed first. If there are not enough mice and rats to feed all of the young, then only the older ones will eat. This may sound harsh, but it almost assures that at least some of the young will survive. At 4 to 5 weeks of age, young barn owls are thickly downed and very alert. They're also very vocal toward any intruders. The adults will continue to bring food to the nest, but at this age, the owlets have begun to feed themselves with what is delivered. At about 8 weeks of age, young barn owls are ready to fledge or leave the nest. This fledgling is the last of her nest and will leave within 2 to 3 days. Even after they've left the nest, fledglings may stay close to their parents for several weeks to get training in the arts of flight and hunting. And flying and hunting are the two things that barn owls do best. Barn owls are probably the most adapted bird on earth for hunting at night. They can see in almost total darkness and use their ears to zero in on any prey they cannot see. The slight noise of a mouse moving through grass is all a barn owl needs to make a direct strike. Since barn owls fly with almost total silence, their prey never knows they're approaching until it's too late. The secret behind their superb hearing is the arrangement of their facial feathers. The skull of a barn owl is much smaller than you might expect. And when we compare a live barn owl to this barn owl's skull, you can better see what a major role these feathers play. The facial feathers are arranged into 2 facial discs. These are what gives the barn owl its heart-shaped face. These discs help to gather light so the owl can see better in darkness, but they also have the more important role of gathering sound. If the feathers were removed, we could see that the opening to an ear canal lies beneath each disc. Sound waves are funneled into the ears by the facial discs, much like a satellite signal is funneled into a receiver. You might think of each facial disc as a biological satellite dish. For example, when a satellite in space sends a signal to Earth, it's collected by a satellite dish and reflected into a receiver. The barn owl's feathers do the same thing, only the signal is a series of sound waves from its prey, in this case, a mouse. As these sound waves are reflected into the owl's ears, it's able to zero in on the source. This system is so accurate that the barn owl can easily catch the mouse without ever seeing it. Owls have 4 claws called talons on each foot. These talons are used to grasp the prey, but only rarely are used to kill it. Instead, barn owls typically use their beak to crush the base of their victim's head, thus killing the prey instantly. Once a meal has been captured, the barn owl will typically swallow it whole. A barn owl may swallow an animal that weighs up to 1/5 of the owl's weight. That's like a 150-pound person swallowing a 30-pound steak in one bite. The meal passes through the esophagus into the glandular stomach. Digestion begins here as fleshy portions are separated from the bones and hair of the prey. These fleshy portions then pass into the muscular stomach and later the intestine, where they are further broken down into nutrients and absorbed by the barn owl's body. The waste material that is left continues through the intestine and is eventually ejected as fecal material called uric acid. The hair and bones that were left in the glandular stomach are pressed together into a slick bolus and regurgitated. The bolus that passes from the mouth is what we typically call an owl pellet. Pellets come in many sizes. All of these pellets were made by the same owl, but some were made from small meals while others were made from large meals. Just because an owl pellet is small doesn't mean it's a bad pellet. The small pellets may contain 5 or 6 small mice and shrews, while the large pellet may contain only 1 rat. These pellets can be collected by biologists studying barn owls. They can reveal what the owls are feeding on, which also tells the biologist the type of habitat the owls are hunting and the type of prey that are available within the area. This information also can be used to estimate how many hawks and owls a certain area can support. If pellets are collected from the same area for several years, they can help to show the long-term population cycles of small mammals, changes in habitat used by owls, and seasonal cycles of both the owls and the prey animals. Pellets also are good for classroom study. They teach the relationship between predators and their prey, while also teaching the skeletal anatomy of small mammals such as mice and rats. Once you have read through the instructions in your owl pellet kit, you should be sure you have all of the materials called for. These usually include an owl pellet, clean paper, a probe, and a pen or pencil. Your owl pellet will come wrapped in aluminum foil. This is to keep the pellet intact while it was being sterilized and shipped. Unwrap the pellet and observe its shape and structure. Also, look for any pieces of grass or leaves that may be stuck to the pellet, and look for a good spot to begin dissection. You need to find a spot where you can work your fingers or probe into the pellet without breaking any bones. Tear the pellet open, being especially careful not to damage the skull of the prey. This is the most important bone for identification. Remove the skull and clean it thoroughly. Place it to one side and look for others in the pellet. Your pellet may contain one skull or several. Once you are sure you've located all of the skulls, begin to remove the other bones. As you clean them, place them to the side. After you have removed all of the bones, sweep away the loose hair and debris. You're ready to identify what you have found. You may want to label a sheet of paper with the various bones that you will identify. A list of these bones should be available in your pellet lab. Start identification with the skull of the prey. Look at the anatomy of the skull from several angles. Take notice of the types of teeth in the skull, the locations of holes known as foramina, the presence or absence of a gap between the incisors and cheek teeth, etc. You can identify the skull in one of several ways. Your owl pellet kit may have a key to skulls, or it may have drawings of the various skulls found in owl pellets. You may also use skull displays or skull sets. When using drawings or skull sets, compare the features of the skull from your pellet to those of the reference skulls. Remember that the skull you are trying to identify may be badly damaged from capture and pellet formation by the barn owl, so concentrate only on the features you can still clearly see. Once you've found a match, write down the identity of the prey and begin to identify the other bones. The body bones can also be identified through comparison to drawings or displays. Choose a bone and begin comparing the features of that bone to the features of identified material. As you identify each bone, place it on the sheet of paper labeled with bone types. Continue this until all of them have been sorted. When you've finished, you should have a piece of paper with several piles of identified bones. You may want to compare the bones between different types of prey, such as voles and shrews. When you finish this activity, your kit may instruct you to make a food web of the prey found by the class. You also may want to build a skeleton from the bones found in your pellet. The number of activities that you perform will be up to your instructor and the amount of time you have in class. The beauty of owl pellet labs is that they can range from a 15 or 20-minute introduction of what an owl pellet is up to several hours of lessons on skeletal anatomy, food webs, and ecological roles of dozens of species of insects, birds, and mammals. When you've finished with all of your activities, you should discard the materials as instructed. Even though the owl pellets have been sterilized, you should always wash your hands thoroughly after handling them.